I was 26 years old when I found out my parents had drained my emergency fund down to nothing. Not because of an accident or a medical bill, but because my brother wanted to open a brewery and needed, in his words, a little runway. I found out by accident, standing in a bank lobby, trying to transfer money for a security deposit on an apartment that no longer made sense for me to rent. The teller looked at her screen, then at me, and said the balance was $11. 3 years of careful saving, gone, and nobody had called to warn me. That phone call I made afterward is the reason you are watching this video. My family thought the hardest part was moving the money. They had no idea the hardest part was still ahead, and it arrived exactly 2 years later, in a room full of people who loved my brother's story more than they ever loved the truth. Welcome back to Secret Family Payback, where ordinary people get tired of paying for someone else's dream and finally collect what they are owed. If your family has ever spent your future and called it teamwork, stay until the end. Drop a comment and subscribe so you do not miss what happens at the end of this one. My name is Renee Castellano. I had built that fund the slow way, working 2 jobs through my last 2 years of college, picking up freelance design work on weekends, eating the same 5 dinners on rotation so I could put something away every week. My father had drilled one thing into me since I was a teenager, that nobody was coming to save me, that the only safety net worth trusting was the one I built myself. I believed him. So I built it, and every deposit felt like proof I was finally becoming someone who could not be blindsided by life. My brother Tyler was the opposite kind of person, the kind who believed something would always work out, mostly because it always had. He had failed out of 2 different programs and borrowed money from cousins he never paid back. Yet the family story about him never changed, that he was a dreamer who had not found his thing yet. When he announced he wanted to open a craft brewery with 2 friends from his old job, my parents lit up like he had gotten into medical school. I remember watching my mother's face at that dinner, the way she looked at him like the rest of us were furniture in the room. The conversation about my savings did not happen the way you might expect. There was no sit down, no warning. I called my mother from the parking lot, shaking, barely able to get the words out, and she answered like she had been rehearsing it. She told me Tyler's investors needed to see a certain amount of capital secured before they would commit, and that my father had quietly moved my emergency fund into the brewery's startup account as a bridge, until the funding round closed. She said it so calmly, like she was reading me a grocery list. I asked when this had happened. A few months earlier, she said, like the timeline did not matter. I asked the only question that mattered, so there's nothing left. Not a loan, not a portion, nothing. She paused just long enough for me to understand the answer before saying it out loud. Your brother needed it more, she said. We knew you would understand because you're the responsible one. That phrase, you're the responsible one, became something I heard over and over, always delivered like a compliment, always functioning like a leash. My father called that night and repeated almost the same line, that family businesses required family sacrifice, and that someday I would be thanked properly. Nobody could ever explain what properly meant because the thank you was never coming. It was a story they told themselves to make the math feel fair. For about a week, I tried to be the daughter they expected me to be, telling myself maybe this really was temporary, that the money would reappear with interest and an apology attached. People romanticize the moment someone finally stands up for themselves and skip over the part where you almost do not. I sat with my bank statements spread across my kitchen table, doing the math on how long it would take to rebuild from zero if I let this go quietly. I was good at rebuilding. I had done it before. Some tired part of me wanted to absorb this the way I had absorbed everything else, because it felt easier than admitting my family had decided, calmly and without consulting me, exactly how expendable I was. Then I thought about something my grandmother used to say before she passed, that the people who call you responsible are usually the ones counting on you not noticing what they are taking from you. I had never understood that sentence until that week. I understood it by the end of that week. So I stopped waiting for an apology and started documenting. I went back through 3 years of my own bank statements and printed every deposit, every transfer, every paycheck split that had gone into building that fund, along with the account history showing exactly when the money disappeared and where it went. I was not building a legal case against my own parents. I was building something simpler and far more useful, proof that could not be argued with later when the story got rewritten, and in my family, the story always eventually got rewritten. While I was collecting that proof, the family group chat kept running like nothing unusual had happened. My sister-in-law Brianna, who had married into this family 2 years earlier and absorbed its religion fast, called me, quoting this exactly, the glue that holds this family together, for being so understanding about the timing. I stared at that message for a long time. The glue, not a person with her own apartment deposit due and her own life quietly defunded. Glue, something useful precisely because it disappears into the structure and asks for nothing back. I did not argue in that chat. Arguing inside a story someone else controls only adds more lines to their version of events. I moved temporarily into a shared place with a coworker and put every spare hour into something my family did not know about, quietly building a financial planning practice on the side, helping other young professionals avoid the exact mistake I had just learned the hard way. The brewery, predictably, did not go the way my parents promised. About 14 months after my savings disappeared, word filtered back through my cousin Dana, who always told me the truth when it made everyone else uncomfortable. The investors pulled out after inspections found code violations, and Tyler's partners started fighting over who owed what. My parents, instead of accepting the bridge had led nowhere, quietly put a second loan against their own house to keep the dream breathing, because admitting failure meant admitting what they took from me had been wasted for nothing. I did not call to gloat. I did not call at all. I kept building, kept saving, kept documenting, and kept reminding myself of one simple sentence that became my own version of an index card taped above a desk. They can spend what they touch. They cannot spend what they never get their hands on again. The years that followed were quiet in a way that surprises people who expect revenge stories to be loud. I built my financial practice slowly, client by client, referral by referral. I rebuilt my own savings, this time keeping the account somewhere my family had no visibility into. No joint anything. Nothing that could quietly become a bridge for somebody else's dream again. When my parents asked how I was doing, I gave short, warm, useless answers. When Brianna tried to get details for the group chat, I gave her nothing to repackage into family folklore. Silence, I learned, is not the same as hiding. Silence is a door, and I decided who got to walk through it. 2 years after that bank lobby conversation, an invitation arrived for my parents' 40th wedding anniversary, a dinner at the country club outside town. I almost declined and sent a gift instead. Then my mother called, her voice doing that bright, careful thing it always did right before she needed something, and asked if I would give a small toast, since I was, again, the responsible one, the steady one, the one everyone could always count on. I said yes before she finished the sentence, because I already suspected what that dinner would actually be. My cousin Dana confirmed it 3 days later. Tyler had started a second business, a logistics company this time, already in trouble. And my parents, deep in debt from the first bailout, planned to use the anniversary dinner, surrounded by family, to ask me publicly to invest. I drove to that dinner with one folder in my bag, the same printed bank statements I had been carrying for 2 years, proof of every dollar taken without my consent and dressed up afterward as a sacrifice I should be proud of. The dinner went exactly the way Dana predicted, until my father stood, tapped his glass, and turned the toast toward family loyalty, toward how proud he was that this family always took care of its own. Then his eyes landed on me, and he said, in front of 40 relatives holding champagne, that he hoped I would consider helping Tyler the way the family had always helped each other. My mother reached for my hand under the table, her voice carrying far enough for the room to hear. We're only asking you to be proud of supporting your family, sweetheart, the same way we know you understand. I stood up slowly, set the folder on the white tablecloth, and opened it where everyone could see the bank logo on the top page. I said I would be glad to talk about supporting family, since apparently we had been doing that for years already, not in the direction anyone had bothered to ask my opinion about. I read one line from that statement out loud, the transfer date, the amount, the destination account, and watched my mother's face change as 40 relatives realized the toast had become something else entirely. I did not raise my voice. I had learned a long time ago that the person who stays calm is the only one anyone remembers as being right. I told the room simply that I would not be funding a second business, not because I did not love my brother, but because I had already paid for the first one without ever being asked, and nobody had ever once said thank you, only proud, which were never the same word. Tyler stood up shouting about ingratitude. My mother cried the loud kind meant to be heard from every table. My father told me to lower my voice, though mine had been the only quiet one in the room. I let the noise happen the way you let weather happen, and when it settled, I said one more thing before picking up my coat I loved this family, and loving them did not mean lying down so they could keep standing on me. I had spent 2 years building something they would never get their hands on again, and what they could not touch, they did not get to ask me for either. I walked out through the country club doors into the parking lot, and for the first time since that bank teller told me my balance was $11, my hands were steady. The fallout was about what you would expect. Tyler's second company folded within the year. My parents are still working through the debt from both attempts, this time without anyone to quietly absorb the difference. Some relatives reached out afterward to say they never knew the real story. I do not need their apology, but it was nice to finally be believed. I still run my financial practice and still keep my own accounts somewhere nobody else can touch. I still think about my grandmother's sentence, the one about people who call you responsible, usually counting on you not noticing what they are taking. If your family has ever asked you to be proud of being spent, let this be the sign to stop volunteering your future for somebody else's dream. Tell me in the comments if you have ever been the responsible one in your family and what that cost you. If this story hit home, share it with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe to Secret Family Payback so you never miss the next one.